Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Braver Angels, I would love to warmly welcome you to the Comedy Cellar at Village Underground. My name is Brent Morden. I am the Red Co-Chair of the Braver Angels New York City Alliance, along with my fabulous Blue Co-Chair, Gabby Timmis, here on stage tonight. We, in service of Braver Angels' mission to bridge the political divide and foster understanding of our political differences and find common ground, we are really thrilled to present you all here tonight with a debate. We have an amazing lineup of speakers debating on the topic, the resolution, Does America Need Radical Change Now? A big question we're going to solve here tonight at the Village Underground. I would love to welcome and introduce our debate chair for tonight, Jessie Manisto. Jessie is a former CIA analyst. She is the founder of the Third Factor magazine. Am I getting that right? Third Factor magazine. Jessie is a passionate advocate for causes both red and blue. Very Braver Angels of her. Sometimes she's a moderate, sometimes she's a radical. Tonight, Jessie will be chairing our debate. Please give a warm New York welcome to Jessie Manisto, everybody.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you so much for being here tonight, everybody. It is such a pleasure to see you all here. I came up today from Washington, D.C., where I work for Braver Angels. I also happen to be the director of the debate program there. So it's such a pleasure to see all of you come out here to see what we have to offer. So if you're not familiar with Braver Angels, we are the nation's largest grassroots organization dedicated to political depolarization. But that does not mean making everyone think the same moderate things. That's why we're doing the resolution we're doing tonight. Who here is at their first Braver Angels event? Raise your hand. Glad to see you out here. Thank you. Welcome. Yeah. And to the regulars, also, thank you for coming back. We love to see repeat customers. So, okay, we welcome everybody from the reddest, Trumpiest MAGA hat wearers to the bluest, wokest progressives, and even back to the red, where it turns into socialists, which we have represented here tonight as well. So whichever of those cover you, whether you are the most moderate person in the room, you will probably be pulling for the negative tonight. I hope I've covered everyone. If not, definitely come talk to me afterward. I'd love to meet you. So why do we bring this kind of crowd together? We at Braver Angels believe that the best way to live in this highly polarized age is to get to know one another across this political divide and to listen with open hearts and open minds to people who are saying what they truly believe for themselves, not some caricature, but people saying what they believe and why. And that's why our flagship debate program, our grassroots community debate, offers members of our community the chance to stand up and say what they truly believe. We are about to kick one off here in New York, right, Gabby? So
October 30th.
October 30th. If you like this, come back. You want to be a speaker yourself, definitely stay in touch.
It's on the Equal Rights Amendment. So
yeah.
Get involved.
That's where we started. But tonight, I'm so happy to be here in your great city where you have such a wealth of intellectual expertise, people with a lot of really interesting takes, so we can bring you something that we call a Coliseum Debate. Our guests tonight, our speakers, we'll have 6, 3 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative, will weave together the tapestry of our political landscape on this question of radical change. And we hope that that will give you something to think about. You'll pull for your own side, but I hope you'll listen with curiosity to people who think differently from you. We force people to take a side on our debate. Polarize to depolarize is basically how our debates work. But I think you'll hear some nuance. You'll maybe be surprised what is represented as affirmative or negative on radical change. Each speaker speaks only for him or herself, and there are no experts. Well, they're all experts actually in this one, but there's no hierarchy, and we also aren't going to ask you to vote on a winner. You're just here to listen with an open mind. Now, here's how it's going to work. We'll begin with a speaker in the affirmative, and we'll alternate between our speakers, affirmative and negative. They'll each get about 5 to 6 minutes. Then I will invite you to come up and ask questions of our speakers. There's a mic over there. I can't really see it because I'm blinded, but I think it's over there, yeah. So I will look for people to ask questions. I will ask you not to give a speech, but to keep it as a question for the previous speaker. Let's see. You will also, I'm going to ask you, and this goes for you speakers as well, when you address a speaker, you have to do it through me. Once I gavel this in, I will be known as Madam Chair, and the only person who gets to be referred to as you is me. I'm a little bit of a buffer, so feelings are welcome in this room, but it's my job to catch them and to protect our speakers. So this is the head and the heart. All of it is welcome. Also, I have the gavel to keep myself safe. So, but what I'll ask you to do is to say, Madam Chair, does the speaker mean to say that cats are really more radical than dogs? Something like that. You get the idea? Madam Chair, does the speaker believe? That's how I'll ask you to ask your question. And if you forget, don't worry. It's my job to gently nudge you, so that this allows us to really get at some of our more controversial and sensitive issues. So let's see. What else have I got for you? If you like a speech, I invite you to do something that we call banging. If you clap, give me a round of applause for all of our speakers today. Thank you. Now, you see it's a little hard to talk over that, so I'm going to now invite you to bang on your leg, or, see, you can hear a little better over that. So if you like something you hear, doesn't mean you agree with it. Maybe the other side's making a good point. Just, you can go ahead and do that. Great way to show some support. I think that's all I've got on how it works. You'll catch on if you're new to this. But now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. We have with us tonight Geoff Shullenberger, the managing editor of Compact Magazine. We have Jeremiah Johnson, the founder of the Center for New Liberalism, a center-left organization with chapters in more than 60 cities around the country. He hosts the New Liberal podcast and writes at the Substack Infinite Scroll. We have Selin Davis, the author of Tomboy, Housewife, and a forthcoming book about the youth gender culture war. She has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Free Press, and many others, and she has a Substack called Broadview. Excuse me, guys. Okay, Broadview, yes. Vish Burra, we have with us tonight, is a grassroots activist, political operative, and a consultant. He is the executive secretary of the New York Young Republican Club. He's the original producer of Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, a Capitol Hill staffer for multiple Republican Congress members, including the infamous George Santos, and famous for his effort to expose the content of Hunter Biden's laptop during the 2020 election. We also have with us Bhaskar Sunkara. He's the president of The Nation magazine, a founding editor of Jacobin, and the author of the Socialist Manifesto. And last but certainly not least, we have Spencer Morin Reynolds, a political reformer working at the intersection of innovation, reform, and independent and third-party politics. His most recent work has seen him as the digital director for Rank the Vote, and before that, as a national strategy director for the Forward Party. Please give a round of warm welcome to our panelists. Now, before we get started, I have one more order of business. I would like to read for you something that is dear to our hearts here at Braver Angels that I hope will set the tone for us tonight. And it is called The Braver Angels Way. You can find it on our website. We read it before every debate. So here it goes. We state our views freely and fully, without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree. We believe that all of us have blind spots, and none of us are not worth talking to. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes. We look for common ground where it exists, and if possible, we find ways to work together. We believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn. And in Braver Angels, neither side is teaching the other or giving feedback on how to think or say things differently. I hope you see that represented in our conversation tonight. I trust that you will. And now, without further ado, I would like to call this debate to order. The resolution on the floor is resolved. America needs radical change now. America needs radical change now. For our first speech in the affirmative, I am looking for Geoff Shullenberger.
For everything to remain the same, everything must change. This famous paradox comes from Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa's The Leopard. It's spoken by Tancredi, a Sicilian aristocrat who's thrown in his lot with Garibaldi. But more broadly, it may be understood as the motto of what we might call conservative modernization. Far from an obscure contrarian position, varieties of this outlook, I would argue, have animated all of the most impactful periods of social, political, and technological progress of the past several centuries. All of them involved a recognition that a purely reactionary defense of the social order would in the end result in its catastrophic demise, and that the preservation of the desirable aspects of that order required an embrace of change. The resolution "America needs radical change now," I believe, should be considered in this light. America is experiencing and will continue to experience radical change. The questions, therefore, are who is able to exert agency over that change, whether the American people are able to have democratic input into its nature and effects, and what values inform, shape, and constrain it. From the late 20th to the early 21st century, America experienced an array of radical changes. To name a few, the economy was globalized via NAFTA and the WTO, financialized via the repeal of Glass-Steagall and related measures. Our communications landscape was radically overhauled by digital networking technologies. Our military became embroiled in long-term conflicts on the other side of the world, and so on and so on. All of these developments had drastic consequences for the lives and livelihoods of average people, yet for the most part seemed to occur without them having any meaningful influence over it, due to the prior hollowing out of the mediating institutions of civic and political life. The populist explosions of the 2010s, from Occupy Wall Street to the election of Donald Trump, should be understood as a response to this set of developments, to radical disruptions in the absence of meaningfully felt democratic input. These eruptions of popular discontent with the establishment were telling in terms of the reactions they provoked. Broadly, I would divide these reactions into two categories. The first simply sought for things to remain the same, and in the process exacerbated the backlash they were attempting to recontain. This is how I would describe, for one thing, the Democratic Party-aligned political, administrative, and media elites' attempt to put the MAGA genie back in the bottle, while dismissing the small d democratic basis of its impetus as deplorable and dangerous, and spinning tall tales of Manchurian candidates. But there was a second, somewhat more behind-the-scenes set of developments within the liberal establishment that went in a somewhat different direction, recognizing in Trump's victory a robust expression of popular disenchantment with the ruling elite that had overseen the hollowing out of America's industrial base, the widening of inequality, the runaway expansion of increasingly distant and unaccountable institutions, and more. Several influential figures who read things this way made it into the Biden administration, and without much fanfare broke with decades of consensus to embrace what were ultimately Trump-inspired approaches to tariffs and industrial policy, while also reviving antitrust as a tool of constraining corporate power. All of this, it seems to me, adds up to a clear application in recent years of Lampedusa's formula. It seeks radical change not for its own sake, but to constrain the destabilizing effects of economic liberalization and technological acceleration, while proposing an alternative vision of how these forces can be harnessed for the broad benefit of the American people. However, this approach lacks a mass constituency, a symptom of the democratic deficit that it attempts, however unevenly, to respond to, and also an effect of its, in other respects, salutary distance from the culture wars that so often substitute themselves for authentic democratic contestation. Hence, its future is uncertain regardless of who prevails in November's election. With all this in mind, I return to the resolution in question. My guiding premise here has been that under the conditions of modernity, the fact of change is not something we have a choice about. To deny that fact is usually to guarantee whatever change comes will be for the worse. The question then is not whether America will change or not, but whether Americans get the sort of change we, and I mean this in the broadest, small d democratic sense, need. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. I am now looking for questions. And I want to also note, I forgot to say, we will do a second round where each of our speakers, I told them via email so they know, get us a response at the very end of 2 minutes. But for now, I'm looking to all of you. Who has a question for our first speaker? Do I see a hand?
Oh, we have a hand right
Over here?
there.
Please, there is a mic over here. If someone can get him the mic, or if
No,
you're
you
willing?
can go.
Okay, gotcha. And I remind you to address your question to me. Thank you.
Madam Chair, please ask the speaker whether he actually favors radical change or not, something that was unclear in his statement.
To our speaker.
I favor radical change that is subjected to democratic participatory input.
Is that a contradiction in terms?
It's a productive contradiction.
I hope we hear more of that tonight. Perhaps other speakers will expand on it. Other questions for our speaker? Is that a hand over there?
I have a question.
Okay.
Madam Chair, the questioner wonders of the speaker, how would the speaker define radical change? What does radical change look like to the speaker?
Excellent question.
Radical change looks like many things, but one example of what it looks like is if you go to any number of cities across much of the United States that have lost, often up to 50% of the population that they had something like 50 years ago. And then more recently and controversially, in some cases, have also attracted new populations from other parts of the world. And this has been the basis of significant political controversy in recent weeks and months. And one of the points that's been brought up, which I think, even though I have disagreed with and returning to my answer to the prior question, which even though I've disagreed with the tenor of the politics around this, I think when people say we have seen the entire life world around us radically transformed and has become unrecognizable, and we did not feel we had any say in that process, then that is something that should be taken seriously. So that would just be, one instance of radical change. Another one might be the fact that when we think about who the most influential, voices are driving political debate, often those are not, broadcast nightly on TV anymore, but instead are, distributed through many other channels. And this is just a fact about, a radical shift in the media landscape that, again, I think has occurred in such a way that it's radically disrupted many things without us really quite understanding what it means politically or what we should think about it. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. One last question for our speaker. I will take one last question. Yes, over here. I will also note, we never define terms. As the chair, I will never define. I love when our speakers define them for themselves. All right, go ahead.
Madam Speaker, or is it Madam Chairman?
Madam Chair, please.
Madam Chair, in recent years, yes, there has been a rise of populists, especially right populists, in the Western world. It seems that often when they take power, they often repeat the same policies of the boring neoliberals they claim to oppose. Georgia Maloney, a right populist who gained power, ranting about immigration. Well, she's increased immigration, and not just immigration from white countries, but immigration from India. She's adding millions of new immigrants to her country. Donald Trump got into power in 2016. He talked a big game, but most notably he cut taxes and there's not really a wall. So what is causing, right populists to get into power and just do the same things as the previous boring neoliberal failed regimes?
It's a good question, and the example I brought up was essentially the contrary one. That I would argue the Biden administration essentially ran as a boring neoliberal kind of restoring status quo, but in fact has done some somewhat populist things. And, that's a striking fact that even many of their supporters don't seem to be particularly aware of or interested in. But, the answer I would have to that is just that populism is part of how I defined it as a reaction to a democratic deficit, a lack of, again, meaningfully felt participation in the political system. And that lack is very real on all sorts of levels, which I don't have time to go into. But I think, part of what's going on is you have figures who are sort of swept into power by this kind of inchoate discontent, but the institutions that have essentially become increasingly distant from any kind of meaningfully democratic process remain in place and are much harder to dislodge, right? And those institutions tend to be affected by an inertia that works against actually realizing the proposals that are brought forward, be they good or bad proposals.
And with that, our first speaker and questioners are thanked. With that, I am turning to our first speaker in the negative, Vish Burra. You have 5 to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay. America does not need radical change now. America needs a radical reminder of what it is and what it always has been, and a revitalization of its founding spirit. America needs to be radically reminded about who founded it, how it was founded, and why it was founded. America was founded in revolution, a radical revolution that intended to throw off the yoke of the old world and establish the new world. A radical revolution that intended to end the paradigm of the stodgy, ossified, and suffocating strictures that kept the vision and progress of men subservient to the narrow desires of a few faraway rulers. America was founded on the desire for unbridled freedom, to pursue not just happiness, but greatness, to think great, to build great, and to be great. That our Bill of Rights enshrined for us the freedom of speech, which today is probably better understood as not only the freedom to express, but also the freedom to innovate. America was founded on the freedom to bear arms, not just for the founders to defend themselves against the savagery that have awaited them as they expanded the New World, but to dislodge any tyrants that stood in the way of that. America was founded on putting destiny in the hands of men who are brave and had the fortitude to commandeer it and cultivate it straight into the solar system. America was founded in our founding fathers' desires of radical expansion, a desire to constantly look for the edge, to face new frontiers, and to tame the wilderness. America was founded with the intent to bring order to the ornery and to conquer the chaos. That the idea of destiny was not only America's to seize, but to manifest. That is our unifying legacy. To claim everything from Plymouth Rock to the Pacific Ocean to the dark side of the moon and beyond. This is the spirit that America was founded on. It is in fact this spirit that makes America what it is, the permanent spirit of revolution. 1776 never ended. It is our permanent struggle, and that's the spirit that is under threat today. Once one tyrannical force is defeated, another springs up. We did so with the specter of international fascism in World War II. We did so with international communism during the Cold War. And we face that threat again today from a creeping, racist, schoolmarm authoritarianism that is not only anti-white, but anti-excellence, that intends to smother the best of us. It privileges the low over the high, the wrong over the right, the weak over the strong, the ugly over the beautiful, the indolent over the innovative, the jungle over the civilization. Every entity on earth that is not imbued with the God-given freedom of the common American man and woman seeks to shackle and chain that spirit of revolution within all of us by any means necessary. And the only proper response to such intentions is to either conquer it and shackle it or annihilate it completely. America doesn't need radical change. It needs revitalization of the American spirit. We need to drain it of the sewage that has polluted its psyche and need to fill it with thriving life and beautiful organisms and magnificent reefs and delicious sustenance, that we will sail and fly and propel ourselves on this spirit with the desire of unbridled freedom at any cost, at any contribution, and that we will have no qualms about plundering those who have built their fiefdoms by enslaving the productive and the righteous, that we shall bring to heel all barbarians who demand our bounty of beauty and life, and that it be turned over at the tip of a sword or the barrel of a gun. Put to rest those who leech on that founding spirit and force our souls to decay for their own material satisfaction, so that one day America can be great again as our fathers had intended. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. All right, questions?
Well, it was a lovely poem. Madam Chair, Madam Pelosi, does the speaker think that maybe what makes America great is that we have moved on from a lot of the darkness in our past? Like many other Western countries, we've decided there are certain things that we don't do anymore, and that makes us exceptional.
I think that the darkness has never ceased. There's new forms of darkness, but we have baked into our DNA a response to address that darkness. And so we don't need radical change. We just need to remember what we did to not only gain and establish our freedom, but to preserve it.
Our own darkness, what we did wrong.
What did we do wrong?
Conversation for another day.
We'll have more debates.
Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. And another question.
There's one in the back. All the way back in the back.
Yes. Yeah, right there. You, yeah.
Madam Speaker, I'm genuinely curious as to know Madam Chair, I'm genuinely curious to know how the Speaker reconciles how that expansion that the Speaker said was so necessary was fueled by the enslavement of minorities, such as ostensibly as himself.
To our speaker.
It certainly did take place, that that minorities such as myself back then did help that expansion, but we've evolved from that, and many people have been included into that new America that we have. So, I would rather take what was given to us and incorporate it and adopt it, because it's what's worked the best to produce the greatest nation in the history of the earth.
One more question. One more question. Not about. That was not in the Braver Angels way. Sorry about that.
Madam Host, would you ask the speaker if they consider it freedom if we only have two political parties to choose from, and even within those political parties not having real primaries?
Different angle to our speaker.
I think that if you can put together a political party that can get 50 plus 1% of the electoral college votes in this country, you're free to do it.
And with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. We'll now go to our second affirmative speaker. I would love to offer the floor to Miss Lisa Selin Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for inviting me. I always think your last name is Manifesto. It's perfect for this job. So, my grandma used to call herself a radical, and that was someone different from a liberal. It was someone willing to take to the streets, someone willing to chain herself to a missile to protest nuclear proliferation. I actually don't know if that's true that she did that. Someone who believed that we needed to tear down structures that couldn't be repaired, all while living a comfortable middle-class life and driving her older brother's hand-me-down Cadillac. And she believed that we needed radical change. That's what being a radical meant. But we have changed radically, especially since the 1990s, starting with Newt Gingrich, the contract with America, the increasing polarization that began then, and the ascent of right-wing media. Conservatives veered very far to the right. We can see that now with the new populism of Project 2025 and this very narrow range of normal that a group of people want to impose on everyone. But as many of us know, liberals have now become radicals, and they have veered as wildly left as the right has. They have decided we should have race-based speech codes, that we should redefine sex to privilege the subjective experience of gender identity over the objective reality of sex. And what we would think of as liberal or mainstream media is now as biased as Fox. And I realize that that's a hard sell for a lot of people here, and we're all slow-boiling frogs who didn't realize that liberal media got deeply, deeply polarized post-Trump. But the only subject that I know a lot about, which is youth gender medicine, is reported inaccurately by the New York Times and in such a biased way that it is peddling as much misinformation due to polarization as Fox. So no, we don't need more radicalism. But I would argue we do need radical change. Of course, that radical change is toward moderation, which is the most radical thing we can do. But I believe that we also need to reconnect with the American project and our American roots, which I will give a very different definition of what those things are. We need to create room for being, believing, behaving different ways and different things, while still having our individual freedoms and some kind of common social contract. I believe the project of America is pluralism. You can oppose abortion, just don't impose that belief on me. You can believe that gender identity matters more than sex, but don't impose it on me. How can we create room for all these different belief systems, prize individual freedoms, and find a set of universal truths and common values? I have no idea. But one way to do that is committing to pluralism as the project. We are living in a pluralistic society in which people reject pluralism and try to impose their narrow range of normal onto other people. America is full of beautiful and troubling contradictions. Yes, we have intense structural problems lingering from our sinful history of slavery, of the free labor of women. Inequalities remain. On the other hand, this is one of the few places in the world where you can live in poverty and still have housing, food, access to water, and toileting, which most places in the world you wouldn't. Some things are going horribly, some things are going really well. But I think our problem is radical individualism, cultural solipsism, and a lack of a cohesive social contract. We need to recommit to pluralism. And for that, we go back to our roots. which are not independence. This country is rooted in interdependence, in helping one another, in setting up institutions to help people. We subsidize families to go west, the right kinds of families to go west, and build the railroads. We had universal child care during World War II, in which there was subsidized housing, child care, even subsidized meals for working mothers, for Rosie the Riveters doing jobs that just a decade before, during the Depression, they were told they could not do because they were women. We have had moments of arranging our society so there's less pressure on individual nuclear families and more sense of collectivism, without it requiring us all to believe the same things.
1 minute.
The village model. We don't live in villages, though. We live in ideological silos. We live in radical polarization, and there are perverse incentives to maintain it. Polarization is profitable for the media, for tech companies, for the billionaires. So we need to prioritize pluralism over profit, which is not something anybody in this country wants to do. So yes, radical change, universal child care, dismantling the two-party system to get closer to something parliamentary and letting more viewpoints be heard. I don't think there should be billionaires when there's 11% of the population lives in poverty. Tax the fuck out of the rich and understand ourselves as pluralistic and interdependent people.
Thank you to our speaker. We will now go to questions.
I am not now, nor have I ever been a communist.
Do I have? All right, we'll come back to you.
Is it me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Amy.
Hi. Madam Chair, what does the speaker think is responsible for the epidemic of solipsism and mental illness on our American college campuses, the polarization that we see, and the victim framing? And does the speaker think that this might be the fault of Generation X parents like herself and myself, who in their misguided attempts to reparent themselves, the children of the me generation, perhaps overcorrected?
This is starting to sound like a speech.
What does she think is the cause?
Thank you to our questioner, to the speaker.
Well, political polarization is correlated to income inequality, which has gotten a lot worse since the 70s. So that's one thing. I think we probably are living in a culture of excess in which gentle parenting is certainly one of the culprit, that we're raising children, some of us who have not really gotten to work their struggle muscle, and they arrive at college thinking that they've been harmed by encountering an idea that's different from the one they hold dear to their hearts. Social media, big part of the problem. Again, social media turns on polarization, on setting us up as for and against, and it's created an entire generation of black and white thinkers. So I think there are a lot of financial and structural causes, but mostly I think everybody hates nuance, and I probably sounded like a Republican in the first half of my speech, but then turned into a socialist. So go nuance. But yeah, nobody likes it. It doesn't make any money, and I can attest to that.
All right, we'll go over here now, and you will be Arthur.
I like that I can't see anybody. It really helps.
Yes, it's just a crowd out there, a vague.
Leader Schumer.
Please.
What does the speaker think of the fact that the New York Times published multiple opinion pieces that were supportive of the Cass review that was very critical of gender-affirming care? Does the speaker think maybe mainstream media has recently started to turn a corner?
Not multiple pieces. If you look at, yes, we have Pamela Paul. It's a good thing. I haven't been in there for over 3 years, so that's all you need to know. And that's the opinion section. So I think there is a slight turning toward the truth, but I think there's been tremendous emotional and financial investment in this kind of social programming about race, gender, even COVID. And because we're so polarized, that if we want to point out that our side is wrong, we're traitors. And I am a traitor, and I'm just trying to figure out a good Halloween costume and dig it.
And to our final questioner, that would be an excellent topic for a debate.
I will say in 2016, I was the 2016 election for Halloween, and it was really scary.
Oh, what did you wear?
A cat right over my... and it said, "Grab me."
Oh, yeah, grab your pussy.
I did also have a bag of deplorables. My mom was really concerned about the cat. She thought that was a little bit too suggestive.
Yeah.
We're
Throwing
just
things
throwing
on stage.
Don't get the wrong idea about Braver Angels, please. To our questioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious because in your speech you discussed...
The speaker said.
Yes, yes. The speaker said that the media has become very polarized, which I agree, and I think it's a big problem. And then you also discussed how social media has kind of taken on the same thing. And I'm just wondering, what do you think...
What does the speaker think?
Yes. What does the speaker think is our solution to, like, figuring out how to get around these polarized... Like, how can we communicate with each other and find middle grounds?
Simple,
well,
right?
somebody should figure out how to make nuance and viewpoint diversity profitable. That will help because it's America. I think journalists have been trained to be activists, and it's been bad for everybody. And of course, many of us used to right-wing media doing that, but didn't maybe notice that mainstream media started doing that too. So the most important thing, is to pursue the truth and to not get sidetracked by the kind of postmodern idea that because there is no universal truth, you shouldn't spend your life trying to get to it. We still have to try. And most of these subjects are filled with inconvenient and uncomfortable and complex truths and truths that contradict one another. And in order to handle that, we have to be well educated, and we have to stop seeing opposing viewpoints as bigotry.
With that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. And when it comes to profit for nuance and viewpoint diversity, thank you to all of you who donated to Braver Angels today. It's not exactly lucrative, but we thank you for that. We now move to our second negative, which will be Jeremiah Johnson. The floor is yours.
Hold it. Yeah, perfect.
All right. Thank you to the chair. Thank you to the other speakers. Thank you, everyone who came. I'm going to do something deeply, deeply unpopular and argue that the status quo is actually pretty good and that we do not need radical change and that things are actually working pretty well. This is horribly unpopular and I expect to be booed repeatedly. I really want to present you two ideas. First, that the current system is working pretty well, and that second, that radical changes usually don't work. And this requires defining what we mean by radicalism. And what is a radical change? And some previous speakers have been like, well, a radical change is a mindset shift, or radical change is when we put a 10% tariff on something, or pass a healthcare bill, or something like that. And we all know that's not what radical change actually means. We've passed healthcare bills, and nobody acted like society had radical change. Nobody acts like, the Biden's, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the biggest climate change spending bill of all time. Nobody acts like that's radically transformed society. Radical change really means overthrowing the system. We have socialists here, we have people who are essentially on the alt-right or the new right, whichever you'd like to say. And these are people who'd like to introduce, the overthrow of liberal democracy or liberal Americanism as a system that has governed America for several hundred years. They'd like to overthrow capitalism. They'd like to make America an ethno-state. To me, that's what a radical change looks like, and that's what we don't need. So I want to introduce, beyond my personal opinions, some numbers into this. America is currently experiencing one of the best economies in the world. Every economy in the world, in the rich world, the poor world, we all fell in the toilet in COVID for the obvious reasons that nobody worked, everybody stayed at home, etc. But which economy in the rich world do you think has had the fastest recovery since COVID? It's the American economy. Who's had persistently the highest growth post-COVID? The American economy, to the point where we're actually growing now faster than China, despite being something like 5 or 6 times their GDP per capita. We also experienced inflation, much like every other country in the world. But again, if you ask, well, which country licked inflation the fastest? Which country currently has the lowest inflation of any rich economy? It's America. We are experiencing the lowest sustained unemployment rate in several generations. It's been below, I think, 4.5% for something like 36 consecutive months, which I don't think has happened in something like 40 years. Real median household income keeps going up. That is inflation adjusted. That's accounting for the fact that households are actually smaller now than they've ever been, but are making more money than they ever have in the past. Basically, things are pretty good. If you ask people, do you feel like the American dream is still alive? 70 to 80% of them will say, yes, I think I've achieved the American dream, or I'm on my way to achieving it. And even more than kind of listing a bunch of economic statistics at you, I could talk about how crime is down. I could talk about how America's carbon emissions are declining at the same time our economy is booming. Even more than just listing a bunch of numbers at you, I think we can talk about America in the sense that, people vote with their feet. We have countries that have radically different systems to our own. You could talk about Venezuela and Cuba and other socialist countries, but those people are almost universally clamoring to get into America. And there are very few Americans who would like to move to Cuba or to Venezuela. On the opposite side of the political spectrum, if you think that the new right and it has a lot of insight and that the values of community and justice and tradition and things like that are more valuable than GDP growth, all the neoliberals, all they care about is GDP and the number on the chart goes up. Well, we have countries that care about that. We have Hungary under Viktor Orban and Putin in Russia, who is very much trying to return to kind of a Christian nationalist authoritarian regime. But all the young people, and I've met them in Russia and Hungary, are desperate to come to liberal Western democracies, and especially America. And even if you look at places that are much nicer than Venezuela or Hungary, if you look at Scandinavia, for instance, rich countries, solid liberal democracies like us, but there are more people from Scandinavia trying to get into America than vice versa. You can look up the numbers and what the immigration statistics say. People vote with their feet, and they're giving a vote of confidence to America. And so I look at all that. I look at where America is, which, America has problems. America has real problems. But I think we're pretty good at fixing them. I think we're on the right track, and life is getting better for most people. And I think that people vote with their feet, and you can see the proof is in the pudding. People want to be here. And I think that radical change usually doesn't work. Radical change usually ends up pretty badly, whether we're talking about the Russian Revolution, whether we're talking about the French Revolution. We have a lot of examples of radical change going very badly, and we have the examples, here that you stick with liberal democracy for a couple hundred years, and you keep getting incrementally better and incrementally better. And things don't get better all at once, whether it's race relations or gay rights or the economy improving, but they get a little better, and all of a sudden 30 years has passed, and things are much better. And I don't think anybody here would say that race relations were in an objectively better place in the 70s than they are today, that gay rights are in a better place in the 70s than they were today, that you'd rather live in the 1970s economy than you would today. You could go back, but who would? And so
1 minute.
that's the core of my argument, I know it's not a popular thing to say, you know, well, actually, shut up and stop complaining. And I don't actually want you to stop complaining. Again, America has problems. You know, we do have a lot of deaths of despair, and we need to fix those things. We need to fix the opioid epidemic. We need to fix, you know, deaths of despair. It largely comes down to stuff like the opioid epidemic, gun violence, and the U.S. has more car crashes than other countries, and that's why our mortality rate has fallen a little bit. But these are things we can fix. We're pretty good at fixing things. When it comes to climate change, you know, I think about past environmental problems. You know, the acid rain used to be a thing. If you're a Zoomer, you might not even know what acid rain was, but we literally had acid falling from the sky, and we fixed it. That we tore a hole in the ozone layer, and we got together as a global community, and we fixed it, and the ozone hole is basically patched up now. Climate change is a real problem, but we can fix it, and so that's my plea. Keep fixing things, keep complaining, but let's stay on the path we're on.
Thank you to our speaker. Would anyone like to complain, perhaps? Do I have anybody? That was just, yeah, okay, thank you.
Hard after a 2-drink minimum. Madam Chair, is that correct? It's the first time I've ever asked a question at Braver Angels Debate, so if you wouldn't mind asking the speaker their feedback regarding the people they say that they've spoken to in Hungary and Russia, and the information sources that are available to those people being the same and of equal accuracy that are available to the speaker, pertaining to their perception of the reality of life over here and the potential discrepancies between all the various truths, all the various realities that coexist, and how that might be informing those people as to what they are seeking and expecting over here in the US.
Foreign news sources versus American news sources.
Yeah, what's available to them, what they're experiencing, what their expectations might be versus what we are experiencing over here.
To our speaker.
I don't want to speak for migrants because they're more than capable of speaking for themselves, but my impression is that people who want to immigrate to America typically have a very accurate idea of what it's going to be like because there are already significant immigrant communities in America. There are many Russian Americans, you know, already living here, or Russian immigrants who are trying to get citizenship who want to become Americans, who, by the way, are probably the most patriotic people you will ever meet in your life, is a newly arrived immigrant who's just gotten their citizenship. But, you know, they can talk to friends and family and colleagues who've already done it. And so with that, I think that their perceptions are pretty accurate, is what I would say.
Additional questions? Or complaints? Over there. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can you ask the speaker about the mechanisms for change and whether or not those are improving? Thank you.
Mechanisms for change.
How change happens is a very interesting thing, and I don't want to get to political theory, you know, political science professor on you. There are many different kind of theories of political change. Some of them say that you have to influence the elites, and, you know, this was very popular back in the 50s and 60s, that really it's all about what the elite class believe, and you influence the beliefs of the elites, and then they change society because they have control of all the levers. In recent times, I think a lot of political science professors and academics would dispute that society has gotten radically flatter as a result of technology and social media, and that now theories of change are that it's much more likely for bottom-up change to really be possible. This can obviously be disputed, and we could write long series of academic papers back and forth at each other about whether or not that's real or not. But that is one idea that I would at least throw out, is that in recent years, with the flatter society that social media promotes, it's easier than ever for bottom-up ideas to emerge.
And a final question.
So I start by saying Madam Co-Chair, right?
Madam Chair.
Oh, okay. Madam Chair, does the speaker believe that since we don't require radical change in America, for a complex issue that you brought up, such as the opioid epidemic, how do you think?
How does the speaker think?
How does the speaker think we could create change around that?
Thank you very much. To the speaker.
The opioid crisis is something I'm not a particular expert in, but I think that the best policies to fix it, when I talk to some people, I've talked to people who are experts on this topic, and the things that they talk about are not grand, sweeping ideological projects that, you know, what we need is a return to Christian virtue nationwide, and then we will have fixed it. Like, that's not a real thing. Let's be serious. That's not going to happen. And some sort of, you know, political revolution in the right or the left direction doesn't address the realities on the ground. What you really need is a set of very boring, technocratic fixes at multiple levels, at federal, state, and local levels. And it's going to take a lot of hard drudge work from first responders, from police organizations, from bureaucrats. It's going to be things like, how do we more effectively crack down on shipments from China? Because most of the fentanyl in this country does not come over the Mexican border. It actually comes through ports from Chinese sources. And you know, kind of demagoguing about immigrants or whatever isn't going to fix that, because, you know, you have to know the actual specific details of where things are coming from. You have to know, well, these particular types of pharmacies located in these particular types of towns are the ones that tend to overprescribe prescription drugs, prescription painkillers, and that's really where it's going on. Or you could just slap a label on something very simplistically and say, well, nobody's allowed to, you know, nobody's ever allowed to give you painkillers anymore, anywhere in the country. I think that the boring, hard work of actual policy is in that kind of, again, we've just got to plug away at holes and plug at holes, and kind of grand ideological visions in the end are not helpful for that, you've got to just go where the problem is, talk to the experts, and that's a much more nuanced, incremental approach, but it actually works.
I suspect that all of our speakers may agree, whether radical or not, change is hard. It can be hard to get that to be a resolution. Thank you. Our speakers and our questioners are thanked. We will now go to our final pair, our final affirmative speaker, Bhaskar Sunkara.
All right. When I wrote this with 12-point font, I thought it was going to be in a brighter room. So does America need radical change? To me, the answer to that question is a resounding yes. And part of the reason why is, for working class Americans, this is already a period of radical change, and it's all the wrong types of change. In 1990, just to give you a brief example of what some have called the friendship recession, which sounds like, you know, a good Atlantic magazine title, but I think actually does reflect something real. In 1990, 3% of Americans reported that they didn't have a single close friend at all, which is very sad. 3 in 100. Today, that number is 12%. Beyond more self-reported loneliness, we've seen at the same time a massive drop in involvement in unions and church attendance and involvement in civic associations of any sort. In 1983, 20% of Americans belonged to a union. Today, the number is less than half that. Our country faces, like previous speakers have mentioned, a serious problem with drug use and overdoses. We suffer 110,000 overdoses a year. Alcohol abuse since the pandemic has also increased, as have alcohol-related deaths. Now we also have massive upticks in hardships related to gambling addiction, especially enhanced as our sports cultures have been overtaken seemingly overnight by the sports betting industry. There is also the issue of crime, which I think in America we've become numb to, but it's not normal what we have to deal with for an advanced, wealthy country. People don't feel safe, and our politicians seem to just accept as a natural fact that we're destined to be a country with, say, 8 times the murder rate of a country like Germany, another big post-industrial country. I'm not using the loaded example. I'm not giving you Luxembourg or something. 8 times the murder rate of Germany. And yes, America's are as a whole wealthier than ever. I think it's worth not overstating the case that we're in this free fall. I think we have performed well compared to our peer nations in that respect. But if we want to figure out why people don't feel that way, we have to talk about issues of disparity and issues of social mobility. So absolute mobility, the chance a child will earn more than their parents, have dropped from 90% for children born in 1940 to 50% for children born in the 1980s. The gap in life expectancy between rich and poor has also widened considerably at the same time. Again, life expectancy as a whole has increased across social classes, but the gap in life expectancy, this disparity, has widened considerably compared to what it was in previous generations. We can add to the fact that a fairly basic point that Americans take for granted: a kid growing up in a wealthy area is going to have a widely inferior life to someone growing up in a poor one. By most measures, the U.S. has among the lowest rates of social mobility of any country. Democrats in particular have spent the last months asking why people are angry despite what they see as Joe Biden's miracle economy. Trump supporters at the same time are speaking, however, to this anger, particularly the anger among native-born Americans, but they offer radical solutions, but the wrong ones. They paint immigration, for instance, a key component of our economic progress, a key component of what I think of when I think of the greatness of America, as being a social ill to be combated. Things that need to be done from a policy standpoint, let's say, to support native-born workers, are instead elevated into an existential, a radical pitched battle in which either new Americans or established Americans will survive. What I propose instead is a radical shift in a different direction, but a shift leftward, not towards a politics of xenophobia and narrowness, but the politics of a new American social democracy. The welfare issues I discussed, the mobility issue I discussed, these are made worse by a poorly designed welfare state, which is both expensive, complicated, and unable to deliver goods, as well as universal welfare states in Europe. These welfare states offer things like childcare for new families, guarantee national health care, and offer free vocational and trade schools, which disproportionately aid working-class families. So what would these radical short-term measures be? I think they would be policies that do prevent excessive red tape and continue to allow the economy to grow while broadly redistributing after the fact wealth from the rich to the poor, and in turn create greater social state support for healthcare, childcare, housing, and job training. We should shift funding of existing social goods like K-12 education from property taxes to federal funding, which can help working class communities. We can in general re-examine our system of government. No, not abandoning liberal democracy, but abandoning our federalist presidential system, which tends to create a tremendous amount of inequalities within states. The big shock in the UK papers of the past year was they said if you take away London, the UK is as poor as Mississippi. And Americans shared that. Look how great our economy is going, while knowing the fact that Mississippi is in the United States. And the people in Mississippi are suffering while the economy booms in states like Florida, Texas, New York, California. So I think this is why radical change is necessary. The United States is going great for many of the people in this room. It's going great for myself, for the professional class, but for working class Americans are being left behind.
Thank you to our speaker. All right, I want to make sure we get our rebuttals in, or our last round. So I am going to do 2 questions. Do I see any questions? Right here.
Hello. Madam Chair, I heard from the speaker that change is important, but not specifically radical change versus, you know, a more moderate change. And I'm curious about the psychology of change and how when you have radical change in any kind of behavior, there's often a pushback and a move totally opposite in a way. And so how might we, for example, when we're thinking about how many of the people in this room are doing really well, but not everybody is, how would we have radical change in such a way that the people in this room would not revolt?
Reactionaries.
The people in this room are what's the Shelley quote? It's the Shelley quote in reverse. We are few, they are many. So I wouldn't worry too much about the revolt of the middle classes against radical change. I would, of course, worry about things like capital flight in a lot of countries. I would worry about a lot of other things, but I think that the United States, because of the power of our currency, because of the size of the United States, would be able to enact social democratic change. But I think the key is, obviously, any change can't get in the way of bottom line profitability. But a lot of the things that I've discussed are either after the fact redistribution, or they're measures that have already been put into place in other countries. So when you think about our healthcare system, it's not that the US healthcare system is a bargain. We spend a higher proportion of our GDP on our healthcare than Northern European countries that have socialized healthcare systems. So part of this is about changing radically the US by taking on not the economy as a whole, not even necessarily capitalism as a whole, but a few sectors of the economy that are horribly inefficient. Like, for example, we have this healthcare bureaucracy. It employs a lot of people. It makes a lot of people rich, but also it's a burden on small businesses that have to pay health insurance out of pocket. It's a burden to U.S. Auto that's competing with German Auto and other countries in which the healthcare responsibilities don't fall on the employer, but instead falls on the state as a whole.
One more question. In the back there.
Madam Speaker, immigration to the United States tends to decrease global inequality while increasing inequality in the United States. It also tends to be good for the people that come here, but the Americans who are here tend to support immigration less the bigger the social safety net is. I wonder how the Speaker would deal with those trade-offs.
So I think there's enough evidence to be concerned that if there was a larger welfare state in the U.S., there might be less support for immigration. But I think that there are other, in part we're getting that evidence because we're looking at how meager the U.S. welfare state is, but also the fact that the U.S. historically has had higher levels of support for immigration than, let's say, European countries. I think that correlation is sometimes overstated. I think U.S. support for immigration is in part because of our roots. You could say that the original sin, if you do, and I think we should see it as original sin of the U.S. as being a settler state, has actually made it easier for people to come in and be incorporated as immigrants. I think this national ethos of being a nation of immigrants does mean at a cultural level it is easier to incorporate new ways of immigration. And also the fact that we have 330 million people, but it's a very vast continent. I think in many ways we're an underpopulated continent. I think in the right conditions, with the right sort of politics and politicians, Americans would come to see this is a land that could do with a lot more people, and also that's doing a great job incorporating immigrants. You don't really hear about homegrown terrorism in the U.S. You don't hear about people living in little ethnic enclaves in the second, third, and fourth generation. So I think being open-minded has actually done great for America. And I think once a welfare state starts delivering for ordinary working-class native-born Americans, I think they'll see that immigration's a net benefit for both the economy, and also that economy supports the welfare state benefits that we all enjoy.
Our speaker and questioners are thanked. And now, for our final speaker of the night, in the negative, we go to Spencer Morin Reynolds. You have 5 to 6 minutes.
I'll do my best. I don't know how to get this up. All right. We're here tonight to talk about radical change. And as with many of my fellow debaters, I'm going to start with a definition. Radical change is metamorphosis. It's changing something's soul, its very nature. And so as you think about the arguments I'm about to make and the ones that my fellow debaters have made so far, I want you to keep that in mind. Is the solution to these problems changing the core of what makes America America? And when we talk about founding principles, about our core, what I mean is this. Our country was founded on the idea that all people were created equal, and that the power of government comes from those who are governed. Those founding cornerstones have allowed us to do some incredible things. It took us 100 years and a civil war, but we ended slavery. 60 years later, we continue to live up to the idea that all people are created equal, and we gave women the right to vote. After World War II, after we won World War II, we rebuilt Europe. We put a man on the moon. We created the internet. We cured polio. When we do it right, the American system doesn't just work, it triumphs. And so the real question in front of all of you tonight is this. Is the proper way to fight the coming tides of chaos to tear down everything we've built in the last 250 years and start over? Or is it to buckle down and fix it? I know where I stand, and at the end of tonight, I hope you stand with me. Now look, I'm not going to tell you that we don't have problems. America is fraught with existential crises. I am a millennial, like most of the front row here, and so chief among them for me is climate change. But we're in a cost of living crisis. We've seen record levels of illegal immigration in the last 5 years, and during COVID, we saw the single greatest transfer, of wealth from the lowest classes to the rich since we started keeping track. But here's the thing. All of these problems are solvable. I just gave you a whole litany of things we've beaten, most of which were bigger than this. The difference is, today, our Congress would rather play politics than solve problems. We are more polarized today than we have been at any point since the lead up to the Civil War. And no one in Washington seems to want to fix it. They just want to fight. We've let greed and corruption break our politics. We have let parties and politicians gerrymander our districts to the point where voters don't get to pick their politicians anymore. Politicians pick their voters. We have let parties and politicians create closed and semi-closed primaries in 30 states around the country, ensuring that just 8 to 12% of the most extreme voters have any real say in what goes on. You combine that with gerrymandering, and the November election is nearly obsolete. We have let parties and politicians consolidate power taken from the hands of the voters so much that in 80% of the country, we don't have two parties. We have just one. 4 in 5 states in this country have a full trifecta at the state government. That means one party controls the state house, the state senate, and the governor's seat. And in most of those cases, their representatives at the national level follow suit. Voters in those states don't get to pick which parties represent them. They just get to pick what face it wears. And that's just the state and local level. At the national level, the Electoral College is even worse. It is an archaic relic of a bygone era that allows voters in Alaska, Wyoming, and Vermont 4 times more power to pick the president than voters in California, Texas, or Florida. That's broken. But luckily for us, the solutions to all of these problems exist in cities and states across the country today. First, institute ranked choice voting to ensure that voters have real choice at the ballot box, and that no representative is ever elected without a majority of support from their constituents. Second, get rid of open primaries for good. Get rid of closed primaries. Replace them with open primaries. Independents and unaffiliated voters outnumber Republicans and Democrats combined in this country, and they should not be treated like second-class citizens simply for refusing to bow to the whims of party politics. End gerrymandering once and for all with independent redistricting commissions. Never again should politicians get to choose their voters. It should always be the other way around. And finally, get rid of the Electoral College. The president serves all the people. All the people should have a say in who they are. You fix these systemic issues and you will see partisan animosity begin to dissipate. The data is clear. You
You fix these systemic issues, and you'll create a government that can solve all of the problems my fellow debaters have brought up. You fix these systemic issues, and we will build a country that can stand for the next 250 years. America doesn't need radical change. It needs simple, common sense solutions that allow the braver angels of our nature to triumph over the greed and corruption that come with politics. Thank you, and I urge you to stand with me.
Thank you to our speaker. Questions for our final speaker?
Please.
There we go.
I will say I like what you did there. The braver angels of our nature. That was a good plug.
He said the title.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Could you please, sorry, Mr. Chair, could you please ask the Speaker, he named a litany of problems involving Congress, our representatives, our current democratic process, yet is for or against radical change, and then additionally, seeing the Electoral College as one of the most fundamental components of our democracy, as in it allows for a democracy that is not controlled by a majority. How do you deal with these? How does the speaker deal with these?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. So there are sort of two parts, I think, to this question. The first is Congress's dysfunction, and the second is the Electoral College. As far as Congress's dysfunction is concerned, one of my fellow debaters earlier, I'm sorry, I forgot which one, brought up the changes in Congress and polarization since Newt Gingrich came to power. And I don't mean to stand here and blame Newt Gingrich for all the country's problems. That's not the point. But if you look at the numbers, starting in the mid-'80s, polarization started to increase in the House. About 10 years after that, it flowed to the Senate as representatives from the House moved to the Senate and brought polarization with them. 10 years after that, you can see that same spike appear in the rest of the voters. And so the reason I propose these changes is to first turn down the polarization in Congress and have that change propagate to changes in the voters, the way we've seen in the past. And the second part, the Electoral College, I get what you're saying. Every time I bring this up, people always talk about how it's, a core. We've changed our Constitution 27 times. That's not radical, it's expected, and we should do it again.
The final question of the night. I see a hand.
Really? I'm that good? Thank you so much.
He's convinced you. Well,
perfect.
I'll have a question.
All right, yeah.
All right. My question for the speaker is, what's your definition of radical change?
Yeah, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it is what I opened with. Radical change is true metamorphosis. So, for instance, I don't think in U.S. history we've gone through drastic, radical changes. We've gone through dozens, hundreds of big changes, small changes, planned, systemic, whatever you want to call them, but all of them were spurred on within the belief, within the ideals that we put together 250 years ago. That the power comes from us, and it's our job to maintain it.
With that, our speaker and questioners are thanked, all of them. Now they're not, you're talking over them. Give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you to all of the speakers. Now, I made the call that the questions you were asking, I gave the time to that instead. We are not going to have time for our second round, but I'm going to call Brent Morden back up, and he is going to tell you what you can do if you want to continue this conversation. Woo.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we give another round of applause for Jesse Manisto and Gabby Timmis leading the evening tonight? Another round of applause for all of our speakers and for you all. Thank you for choosing to spend your evening with us. Comedy Cellar, please tip your servers. They treat us very well here at the Village Underground. Come join us afterwards. Let's continue the conversation at Vol de Nuit. It's a bar right around the corner on 4th Street. I would love to see you all there. Learn more about Braver Angels, braverangels.org. Reach out to us. We have some upcoming events. We have a play. Can you believe that? We're doing a play next Monday. I'll be in it. Come see me. Come see all of us. We have another debate. And then I hear we have an election coming up. Have you heard about this?
That hasn't crossed my desk
I know.
yet.
Go out and vote. How about that? And we'll see you next time. Thank you all.